I wish I could forget everything that happened in that summer. I've tried, believe me. But the memories are like barbed wire wrapped around my mind, cutting and binding me to a past I can't escape. I guess that's why I'm finally telling this story now. Maybe if I let it out, the ghosts will finally leave me alone. It all started when my parents decided I should spend a couple of weeks with my grandparents in Briarwood, a small, forgotten town in the middle of nowhere. They said they wanted me to experience a simpler life, away from screens and noise. I didn't argue. My grandparents, Grandpa Bill and Grandma Ruth, were kind and loving people, and their farm was a peaceful place, or so I thought. The day I arrived, the sun was setting behind the hills, casting long shadows over the endless fields of corn and barley. The air smelled of hay and something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was a mix of burnt wood and decay, faint but unsettling. My grandparents greeted me warmly, though they looked older than I remembered. Grandpa Bill's hands trembled slightly when he hugged me, and Grandma Ruth's smile seemed a little too forced. I shrugged it off. They were getting old. Maybe that's all it was. The first couple of days were quiet. I helped with chores, fed the chickens, and spent afternoons in the shade of the big oak tree behind the house. But at night, things felt different. The darkness seemed thicker out there, like a living thing pressing against the walls. Strange noises drifted through the open window, whispers, rustling leaves, the occasional thud coming from the barn. "Just the wind," Grandpa Bill said when I asked about it. "This old house creaks and groans sometimes." But it didn't sound like the wind, and it didn't sound like the house. On the third night, I was woken by a low, rhythmic chanting. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as I sat up and rubbed my eyes, I realized the sound was real. It was coming from outside, near the barn. I crept to the window and looked out, my heart pounding in my chest. In the pale moonlight, I saw them, my grandparents, standing in a circle with a few other people from the town. They were holding hands, their heads bowed. In the center of the circle was a small wooden altar, and on top of it, a dead rabbit. Blood pooled around its lifeless body, glistening in the moonlight. I stumbled back from the window, bile rising in my throat. What the hell was this? Some weird rural tradition? I didn't want to know. I crawled back into bed and pulled the covers over my head, squeezing my eyes shut until the chanting stopped. The next morning, I couldn't look at my grandparents the same way. Their smiles felt wrong now, like masks hiding something dark and twisted. I kept quiet, too afraid to ask questions. I convinced myself it was a one-time thing, a bizarre ritual I wasn't supposed to understand. But it wasn't. The days after that night felt different. The air on the farm was heavy, thick with an unease I couldn't shake. I started noticing things, little things, that I couldn't explain. Dead birds lying near the back door, their eyes open and glassy. Symbols scratched into the dirt near the barn, shapes that looked like crosses but with something off about them. And the smell, that sickly sweet mix of decay and burnt wood, it was stronger now, clinging to everything. I wanted to ask my grandparents about it, but every time I tried, my throat tightened. It was like some unseen force was squeezing me, warning me to stay silent. The fear gnawed at my insides, but I pushed it down. I didn't want to believe that anything was wrong. Then, one afternoon, I was in the kitchen helping Grandma Ruth peel potatoes when I heard it again. That low, rhythmic chanting. This time, it was coming from inside the house. The sound was muffled, like it was drifting through the walls. I looked up at Grandma Ruth, but she didn't seem to hear it. Her hands moved methodically, the knife gliding through the potato's skin in one smooth motion. "Grandma," I said, my voice trembling, "do you hear that?" She paused, the knife hovering above the cutting board. For a moment, everything was still. Then she smiled, but her eyes didn't. "It's just the wind, sweetheart," she said softly. The chanting stopped. I nodded and went back to peeling. pretending everything was fine. But inside, my stomach churned. I knew what I'd heard, and I knew it wasn't the wind. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my room felt like they were closing in on me, the shadows shifting and writhing in the corners. Every creak of the old house made me jump. I pulled the covers up to my chin and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will myself to sleep. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. The chanting, louder this time, more urgent. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from beneath me. My heart pounded in my chest. I swung my legs out of bed and tiptoed across the cold wooden floor. The sound was coming from the trapdoor in the hallway, the one that led to the root cellar. I'd been down there once with Grandpa Bill to get some jars of preserves. It was dark, cold, and filled with the scent of earth and mold. I knelt beside the trapdoor, my breath shallow. The chanting grew louder, the words a twisted, guttural language I didn't understand. My hands shook as I reached for the iron ring and slowly, quietly, lifted the door. The smell hit me first, a rancid wave of rot and decay. I gagged, covering my nose with my hand. The cellar was pitch black, but the chanting was clear now, echoing off the stone walls. I leaned over the edge, squinting into the darkness. And then I saw them. My grandparents, standing with their backs to me, their hands raised high. Between them, lit by the flickering glow of candles, was a figure. It was cloaked in shadows, its shape barely human. Eyes gleamed from the darkness, cold and unfeeling. On the floor at their feet lay a dead animal, a lamb, its throat slit, blood pooling beneath its limp body. The figure raised a hand, and the chanting stopped. "You have served well," a voice whispered, low and raspy. "More years shall be granted." I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. My body shook with terror. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I knew it was evil. My grandparents were offering something to this thing. And in return, it gave them more life. The figure turned slightly, and for a split second, its eyes met mine. My blood turned to ice. Those eyes, empty black pits, stared straight through me. Then the figure smiled. "We have a guest," it whispered. My heart stopped. My grandparents turned around slowly, their eyes glassy and vacant. Grandma Ruth's mouth curled into a twisted smile. "Why are you out of bed, sweetheart?" she asked softly, her voice gentle, but her eyes cold. I slammed the trapdoor shut and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I sprinted through the house, my bare feet pounding against the wooden floor. Behind me, I heard the trapdoor creak open and footsteps following me. I burst through the front door and into the night. The cold air cut into my lungs, but I didn't stop. I ran past the barn, through the cornfields, the tall stalks whipping against my face. The chanting started again, rising into a feverish chorus, carried on the wind. I didn't stop until I reached the road, a narrow, cracked strip of asphalt that led out of Briarwood. I collapsed onto the gravel, gasping for breath. Behind me, the farm was swallowed by darkness, but I could still hear the chanting, echoing in my ears. And then, it stopped. I sat there on the cold gravel road, gasping, my heart hammering in my chest. My entire body trembled, my mind unable to process what I had just witnessed. My grandparents, the people who had read me bedtime stories and baked me cookies, had been part of something monstrous, and that thing in the cellar had seen me. It knew I was there. A wave of nausea hit me. I doubled over and vomited onto the side of the road. My throat burned and tears streamed down my face. I wanted to wake up, to believe this was some twisted nightmare. But the chill in my bones told me it was all real. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive. The wind rustled the cornfields, and the stars above seemed too far away, too indifferent to what was happening down here. I knew I couldn't go back to the farm, but where else could I go? Briarwood was a small town, and there was nothing but miles of fields and forest in every direction. My parents were hundreds of miles away. A crunch of gravel behind me broke the silence. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. In the dim moonlight, two figures emerged from the shadows of the cornfield. My grandparents. Their faces were calm, almost serene, but their eyes were wrong, glassy, empty, like doll's eyes. "Sweetheart," Grandma Ruth called softly, her voice carrying an eerie calm. "You're scared. Come back inside. Everything's all right." "No," I croaked, stumbling backward. "Stay away from me." Grandpa Bill took a step forward, his hands outstretched. "It's for your own good, son. You'll understand soon." Behind them, the corn rustled again. More figures stepped out. The neighbors. Mr. Carlson, Mrs. Weaver, Sheriff Wilkins, people I'd waved to in town. Their faces were slack, their eyes dead, like puppets with broken strings. They surrounded me, their footsteps slow and deliberate. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran down the road, my feet pounding the cracked asphalt. The darkness seemed endless, the road stretching forever into the night. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel them behind me, closing in. Their calm, rhythmic footsteps, like a macabre parade, followed me, tireless and steady. I don't know how long I ran. My legs screamed in protest, my lungs burned. The road blurred beneath my feet, my vision darkening around the edges. Just as I thought I'd collapse, I saw it. A dim light ahead. A gas station. Hope flared in my chest. I sprinted toward it, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the night. The station was old, the paint peeling, but at that moment, it felt like salvation. I stumbled through the door, the bell jangling overhead. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard, looked up from behind the counter, startled. "Hey kid, you all right?" I gasped for breath, clutching the doorframe. "Please, help me. They're coming." His eyes widened and he hurried around the counter. "Whoa, slow down. Who's coming?" Before I could answer, the bell above the door jingled again. I turned, dread pooling in my stomach. Grandpa Bill and Grandma Ruth stood in the doorway. Their smiles were soft, comforting even. To anyone else, they would have looked like worried grandparents searching for a lost child. But I knew better. "Come now, dear," Grandma Ruth said. "You're causing a scene." The clerk frowned, looking between me and my grandparents. "These your folks?" "No," I shouted, backing away. They're not what they seem." Grandpa Bill sighed, shaking his head. "The boy's just tired, sir. Had a rough night. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." The clerk hesitated, his brow furrowed. "Kid, do you need me to call someone?" "Yes, call the police, please." My voice cracked with desperation. Grandma Ruth's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "You shouldn't have run, sweetheart. You shouldn't have seen." The air in the room shifted. The fluorescent lights flickered, and a cold, suffocating presence seeped into the space. The clerk's eyes glazed over, his body going rigid. He took a slow step back, his face slack and expressionless. "No," I whispered, horror dawning on me. "No, no, no." I turned to run, but it was too late. My grandparents were already there. Grandma Ruth's cold hand clamped around my wrist, her grip impossibly strong. "It's time to go home," she said softly. A surge of icy dread shot through me. I fought, screamed, kicked, but their hands held me tight. The gas station dissolved around me, the world spinning into darkness. I woke up in my bed at the farm. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, the chirping of birds a cruel mockery of normalcy. My head throbbed, and my limbs felt heavy, like lead. I sat up slowly. My grandparents were sitting by the foot of the bed, watching me with those same dead eyes. "It's over now," Grandpa Bill said gently. "You're safe." But I wasn't. I knew I never would be again. I didn't ask questions. I didn't scream. Some part of me had given up, accepted that whatever they had done to me, whatever thing they served, had already taken its toll. I was marked now, damaged. The following days passed in a haze. I don't remember leaving the farm or saying goodbye. My parents picked me up, smiling and chatting as if everything were normal. I wanted to tell them, to beg them to believe me. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Something had silenced me. Years have passed since that summer in Briarwood. I've tried to move on, to live a normal life. But the nightmares haunt me. The shadows in dark corners seem to whisper my name. Sometimes, when I look into a mirror, I swear I see those cold, empty eyes staring back. I don't know how long the thing gave them, how many more years of life and health they bought with their rituals. But I know the price wasn't just paid in blood. It was paid with me. This is the first time I've spoken about it. Maybe it's too late. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. But if you ever find yourself in a small town where the air smells of decay and the smiles of the locals seem a little too perfect, run. Because some bargains can never be undone, and some nightmares never really end.